Hello there, and it is us, intrepid viewers. It is me, Clive Davis, him,
Nick,
and him,
Gavin with again.
and we are not your monkeys anymore.
no, definitely not.
So this is a companion, YakiCineSoba, to our recent literary aspect, where we talked about Bill Landis and Sleazoid Express, and you can find that now where you find all good podcasts. It's totally awesome, of course, and as a companion, we thought we would choose a film each from the pages of Sleazoid Express to discuss. So first up, our one of our favorite guests, Gav. All right, Gav. And what have you got for us? What did you choose? What are we going to be talking about?
Well, talk about PREACHERMAN, the magnum opus of a fella called Albert C. Viola, who went down to North Carolina to write and direct this movie, as well as star in it under the name Amos Huxley. It's also the name of his character in the film. So
Good name.
yeah. So Amos is a phony circuit preacher who's out to fill his pockets with the money of other men and his bed with the wives and daughters of other men, all the while pretending to preach the word of the Lord.
That's
synopsis.
That's how anti-clerical Gav is. He can't even say the thing. It's just like
He chokes.
Yeah. So yes, he's Albert Di Viola, as you said, and we first see him kind of being run out of town because he's been caught in bed with the sheriff's daughter, right?
Well, not just in bed, but in a haystack in a barn, no less, which is a great place for it. This movie is as country bumpkiny, broad, stereotypical as I've ever seen. Like, this thing makes hee haw and any of that others like stuff. Yeah, it just makes it seem positively subtle.
Yeah, it's up there with Sassy Sue or Pig Keeper's Daughter, or one of those Harry Novak kind of races, right?
Right. But it's so Albert's from what, Long Island, right?
Supposedly, yeah, that's just what the IMDb saying, although I've heard elsewhere he may have been from San Antonio, Texas, so
okay.
Sounds like it might be a bit more credible, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he does a decent job of doing the the accent and selling the idea that he's this Southern preacher, but yeah, I was interested to know, because when I was reading a little bit about the film, that it was often mentioned, we wanted to make this country, like cornpone thing, but we needed somebody who knew how to make a film, so we went to New York to get this guy to direct.
He's been like doing some work in New York though, so definitely a New York connection there. He directed a few sexploitation films that seems to have been involved in the stage as well.
He ends up, while on the run, he ends up in the house of Eileen Kristen and her father, and she's kind of busy messing around with how many? 4, I think. Was it
yes.
Clive,
yes.
Marvin, Jimmy, and Billy Joe, who have this lovely introduction thing where they come in from different sides of the window with a comical side effect, right?
And then they all try to climb through at the same time, don't they?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. If Smokey and the Bandit was a little bit too cerebral for you, I think PREACHERMAN is PREACHERMAN.
The actor seems to be like the real big success story of the film in terms of having an acting.
Yeah. She ends up like on a very long run on like Ryan's Hope or something like that, like a TV soap opera thing that ran for years and years and years. And yeah, she seems to have quite a decent bunch of credits to her name.
I heard she was in the original Broadway production Grease as well. So
she was also
she's from Brooklyn, I think. So
She's in
Well,
that.
she does a good job of appearing not to be then.
There's a good Corman film, The Lady in Red, like a Dillinger film. She's in that as well, I noticed,
Okay.
among her credits. Yeah, she does seem to be pretty busy.
But I think a lot of the people in the film were very local, sort of North Carolina, sort of stage actors and musicians, and a lot of the money from the film seems to have come from like local businessmen who own like driving theatre, things like that. So a lot of the publicity for the film, makes a lot of case about it being a North Carolina production.
Right.
An attempt to sort of put together like a film industry in North Carolina. So I suppose Albert T. Roller was to North Carolina what Cliff Tremlow was to Manchester. In terms of that building.
I'd like to see Cliff Tremlow playing a preacher who goes around.
Oh, it's funny though. I couldn't help but
You still think I'm too old? No.
I couldn't help but think though about because he does a pretty good job of the preaching part. Like when we get to the final kind of act of the film, and he goes out and he has this big revival out in the in the countryside with everyone at their little benches and stuff. But I kept flashing on Timothy Carey as both God Hilliard from The World's Greatest Sinner, and also his like Ulysses from Poor White Trash. And I kept thinking like, yeah, he would have been really good in this role, or in this kind of role, as sleazy Southern preacher.
The only problem with Timothy Carey, though, if he was in the same role, but I mean, it doesn't really make sense that Eileen Kristen is quite so keen to jump in the sack with this balding old fellow. But then again,
well, no, it's not, because she doesn't, because she's jumping in the sack with the Angel Leroy. I think you'll find.
But at least he's kind of non-threatening looking.
Right.
Timothy Carey, which should be in the woods. She'd take off. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, fair enough.
Because he's the wrong type of, like, Klaus Kinski had that weird feral, on the edge of sexy sometimes.
Yes,
when he was younger.
Yes,
right?
especially when he was younger. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Timothy Carey just looks feral and
terrifying. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, that whole part where, so basically, yeah, when he shows up at the farmer's house, because he's he's trying to get out of the state, right? Because he needs to cross state lines, because the sheriff has told him under no uncertain terms. Out of the county. Yeah, sorry, the county. He's got to cross county lines. And so the sheriff comes right out of Dukes of Hazzard, except before Dukes of Hazzard. And am I right in thinking that Bill Simpson has played this character, Sheriff Zero Bull, in something else before this? I thought I read this, that this is a character he'd already generated in something else, and then
it briefly shows up in a film called The Body Shop. Better known as Dr. Gore on video.
Well, the connection there as well is that G.J. Patterson Jr., who directed it, is in this film as well, isn't he? He's one of I think he might be one of the four lads, Clyde, Marvin, Jimmy, or Billy Joe. And he also was the production manager.
Yeah.
So he did, like you said, Dr.
I think at one point in the film, those two films did play on a double bill at the drive.
Dr. Gore and the Electric Chairs, the other one he did, right? Which is...
Yeah, died very young, though.
Yeah, both very interestingly weird movies out of North Carolina as well.
Yeah,
that also sounds like a great band name, Dr. Gore and the Electric Chairs.
Yeah,
we might need to start that band.
Wayne Kennedy got there first, though, I think. So,
okay.
Yeah. So, what did we make of? Because me and Nick had never seen Preacher Man before. Oddly enough, I think Gav had seen it before, right? So,
yeah, video on it.
So he's to blame. We should say we watched the Trauma version, because Trauma put it out, because that seems to be the uncut version, right?
Yeah, it seems to. I think such was the popularity of the film that at one point it seems to create a demand for some sort of like family-friendly version of the film. So there's been like cut and uncut versions of this film distribution over the years. But when it was initially put out on video in America, in like the early 80s, that was a cut version, the censored, which takes out all the nudity and all the swearing. So we also got that version in the UK on video as well. I don't think the uncut version sort of surfaced on video until Troma put it out in the mid 1990s in the US.
PREACHERMAN would have been a pre-cert release.
Yeah, but even that was cut. Yeah, it have ended up with a cut version. Yeah.
But for whatever reason, because I'm guessing it wouldn't have caused much problem, but they just couldn't.
No, I think it was just distributor got the hands on whatever was there. And
yeah,
it
is a fascinating. We were talking off line, I guess, earlier about like we are slightly mystified by the ongoing fascination with the Video Nasties lists, but there is that whole wider world of pre-cert videos as well, which is kind of interesting because there were even more titles, right, that just never came back again, not because they were problematic necessarily, just because distributors couldn't be bothered and it wasn't worth the hassle just in case they did get, and obviously they had to resubmit it for a certificate, which they didn't have to do before. So a lot of cheaper companies that couldn't afford it just, so there's a whole load of stuff. I think there's still a fair few titles, right, which only got pre-cert releases in the UK and still haven't surfaced on Blu-ray or DVD, or there's still a few.
Well, yeah, that's true of the film sequel as well, PREACHERMAN Meets with a Woman, which was only ever released on video in the UK and in the pre-cert era, and doesn't seem to surface anywhere on video anywhere else. But
no, I have a copy, but I read what you wrote about it in your blog, and then it turned me off seeing it. It doesn't. It sounds like they excised all the nudity and stuff, right? It's a very PG.
Yeah, and that one compared to the first one, that seems to like vanish off the face of the earth, and certainly didn't replicate the success of the original film. So possibly because they went for a PG.
I think so. I mean, I mean, you know, you've got to have the sleaze, right, for it to work. Really, it's part of the character, even, right? It's like.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what's fascinating to me about Amos, is that, like, at first I couldn't figure out if we were supposed to like him or not. If he was supposed to be like the hero or if he was just supposed to be a scumbag. And it doesn't seem to me, I didn't really put my finger on what the film wanted me to feel about him until the very, very end, until the whole kind of comedic part where he's like running away and then he gets picked up by, you know, is that the, you know,
that's Widow Woman. Yeah.
Is that Widow Woman who's in the next film? Okay.
Holly McGee.
Yeah. So I was like, oh no, I guess I'm supposed to be on his side, I guess, because there's this part in the middle of the movie where they cut back to, you know, Sheriff Buford T. Pusser or whatever the fuck he is, and he says he says like, oh yeah, he's wanted for statutory rape and all. He's just got this list of crimes. You're like, whoa, what?
That's easy to do.
That wasn't a crime in the Carolinas in the early 1970s.
They were different times, Nick.
I see.
I mean, the irony is Amos Huckley does sort of enrich the lives of the people he sets out to scam. Yeah, I mean,
you're right.
I did quite like. I thought it was quite a nice touch that when he discovers the still and he goes bonkers for it, it's like, and it's, oh yeah, I do like the idea that he has of let's start a church on the same ground as the, like, you know, like they used to in medieval times, like when what's that? Is there some Werner Herzog film or something? It's the setting is like there's a church on an edge of a cliff where some martyr or something had jumped and they found his last footprint and then they built a church on top of it. Kind of, that kind of feeling, right? To commemorate some patch of ground. But anyway, yeah. So it's quite good fun, isn't it, PREACHERMAN?
Yeah, I would say the only thing is actually I made the mistake of watching the trailer first, and whoever cut together the trailer does a really good job of front loading it with everything that's exciting about the film, and then when you watch the movie, you're like, oh, I really thought there was going to be more nudity than there actually is, and a bit more action maybe than there actually is. But other than that, once I realized, okay, no, it's slightly differently paced, and there's it's a bit less full on. Then the trailer really makes it feel like it's just gonna be nonstop TNA, and the preacher preaching is wild nonsense. But yeah, other than that, no, it does not outstay its welcome. We've been, again, Clive and I have been talking about this lately, but I really like a movie that clocks in at like an hour and 20, an hour and 25. Nothing needs to be longer than an hour and 31 minutes. I don't think, personal preference. So it's great in terms of running time.
The theme tune is someone's uploaded the whole theme tune onto YouTube, and I would say, if you're interested in the film, don't listen to the theme tune before you've seen the film.
Yeah, because it's almost like a Chinese opera. Yeah, it just tells you the story.
The entire plot of the film, including the ending, in 2 minutes.
It's lucky they didn't hire this guy to do like the Sixth Sense or something. And then Bruce found out that he's the dead man, and then he's been seeing
So here's a question: Is the guy who sang the soundtrack the one-armed overalls wearing guy, or is that apocryphal? Because I read that somewhere.
Can't play the guitar, surely.
No, but the voice. I mean, at least the singer.
I think he did contribute to the soundtrack. It's called W. Henry Smith. Yeah, and he was one of the financiers as well. He also owned a drive. Him produced a lot of films in this sort of vein.
It's quite nice as well. I quite like the fact that he's revealed to have one arm, and no one mentions it. No one makes a big deal. It's just one arm.
I think he had 2 arms in real life. Yeah, he also produced Hot Summer in Barefoot County, Trucking Man, Redneck Millers.
Hang on. Did you just drop there kind of quite quickly? Did you just say that he actually had 2 arms?
I think so. Yeah, there's photos of him.
Oh, really?
Possibly.
The one behind his back.
I've seen both of them when he seems to have 2 arms.
Gotta give it to him. I mean, he did a pretty good job. And normally you can tell someone's got their hand up their jumper, right? But
yeah, no.
Well, I think so. I don't know what's swear on it, but I'm sure I've seen photos where he seems to have 2 arms. Or maybe more of a prosthetic or something like that. I don't know.
But Preacher Man's kind of fun. I think if you don't, like you said, Nick, if you don't necessarily approach it expecting a balls out exploitation film, you just want something a bit more gently amusing to use a few cells too. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Obviously, Gav likes it because he chose it after.
Yeah, and a nice sense of place. You definitely feel like it's a lived-in Carolina.
Yeah, those regional films are good for that. There's snapshots of it, time and place.
Yeah, they have a different flavor than stuff coming out of California or New York for sure. So. And
was it heavily intimated that one character fucked chickens?
Yes. How the hell did we? Yeah. I would say more than heavily. It was established as a fact that there is a chicken fucking character in this film.
To the point of destruction. Like whenever he has a chicken, he's like, oh, like.
yeah. He has to be put back on the right track.
Yeah.
By Amos, because he can't concentrate on his work of making moonshine.
That was kind of interesting. Also worth mentioning, Viola, one of his other credits was he seemed to have been the guy who prepared the American version of Mondo Balordo, however you pronounce that, right?
Okay.
That was his work, I guess, cutting it and adding a new narration and all that.
Boris Karloff did the narration, I think, for that one.
Yes, yeah. Makes it a very distinctive watch, right, to have Boris Karloff doing your voiceover. Very different film up next.
Yes.
From Nick. What did you choose from the pages of I keep wanting to say Shock Express, Sleazoid Express.
Sleazoid Express, yeah. So there's a section on kind of black cinema or black exploitation cinema, and I suspect this is maybe the least representative film from that section of the book, having now seen it, because it's not really that exploitational. It's kind of a serious treatment of a very serious real world event, and it's yeah. So what we're watching, we watch is a film called Black Jesus, which has a different title, I think, in Italian.
Also known as
Seduto.
Out of Darkness as well in English, right?
Okay. I didn't know that, but yeah, seduto alla sua destra, like he sits on the right-hand side or left-hand side or something like that.
Yeah. Which, of course,
so,
famously, you shouldn't pass the
duchy.
Yeah.
Yes. I do remember that song.
Go the other way.
So this is a film directed by Valerio Zerlini, who's actually not a director whose work I was really familiar with before.
Wait,
probably. Yeah.
He did direct one other excellent film, which I remember recommending to you before, Nick, and the book on which it's based. He made a film.
Is this the Tartars?
Desert of the Tartars, yeah.
Yeah. I was going through his film thing. I was like, I think this is what Clive was telling me about, the book I should read and the film I should watch.
Yes, a great book and a great film as well.
Okay.
I'm keeping more of his stuff on the strength of these two, I have to say.
And he seems to have been, like a lot of these lefty directors, like these communist directors of the era. He had fought as a partisan against the fascists, kind of at the tail end of World War II, and then went off to make kind of left wing films. Interestingly, Carlo Lazzani is I think the producer. Let me go check that. Because he's a director I really, really like. He kind of is one of those people who was able to, I think, mix like the serious, high-minded political stuff with produced by Carlo Lazzani, with the more exploitational stuff, like really, really well. Like his film Bandits of Milan is a great example of that, where it's on the one hand, it's got the politics, but it's also a rip-roaring Thomas Millian, Jean-Marie Volonté, two-fisted action film.
He made Requiescent as well, right?
Yes, yeah, it's a great spaghetti western.
With Pasolini as a preacher, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was interested to hear him. And then the other name that jumped out at me before we get to Woody Strode and Franco City, but on the production side of things, this is edited by Franco Arcali, who is, if I had a favorite editor of Italian films, it's him. He's the guy who did Giulio Questi's Django Kill, Death Laid an Egg, which is fucking fantastic film. And so he also did Bertolucci's films and a bunch of other. Died at 48. Just read that when I went to his page. That surprised me.
I'm assuming, Gav, that both you and I were sat down at probably exactly about the same time on a Sunday night once upon a time to watch Alex Cox introduce Django Kill on BBC Two. Would that be correct?
Oh yeah, heavily cut though, unfortunately, I think.
Yeah, but that was a good. I remember looking forward to that a great deal. See, I knew Gav would have done that as well.
But that was also when your dad disabused you of the great metaphor at the end of the film, right, Clive?
Yes, this is true. Yes, this is it would have been one of my gems of film criticism I take from my late father. Sometimes he could be quite entertaining and informative. It is obviously a great metaphor, but then he just pointed out wood burns before gold melts. So
the scene where all the gold pours out of the wooden cabinet.
It kind of
and burns the villains. But so that's all behind the camera. In front of the camera we have Woody Strode, who again
I was just going to say, Nick, I think there's a reason that Lazzani is. So apparently, I wasn't aware of this the first time I saw it, but looking it up this time. So this originally was supposed to be part of an anthology film called Love and Anger. It was one of those. They don't really make them so much now, but there used to be a whole bunch of these, pan-European anthology films, right? Like with one segment by one kind of respect, one Italian, one Spanish. So yeah, so and I think Lazzani directed one of those, and but it wasn't used, and it was expanded out into this feature.
Okay.
Which is, I haven't seen Love and Anger, but I can't imagine this fitting in as just the segment of an anthology film somehow.
No. And so yeah, so it stars Woody Strode, who was a like an athlete turned actor, did stuff for John Ford. But you know, it's interesting. He moved to Italy not long before this film was made, basically out of a feeling that he just wasn't getting, you know, he was always playing kind of fifth role or sixth role or even further down in the building. He did a lot of African adventure kind of stuff, as well as the westerns.
Is he in Once Upon a Time in the West? Isn't he somewhere? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So rather famously, I guess, when he went to see the film in the cinema, and there's that like opening 5-minute mega close up of his face, he was apparently moved to tears. He said it was the longest his face was ever in close up. In fact, he said he barely ever got close ups, even when he was playing a substantial role in an American production.
Well, this I mean, Black Jesus is a rare Woody Strode starring role.
Turn, yeah.
Unfortunately, we watched this in an Italian dub, right? And I can't for the life of me remember if I didn't look this up. I don't know if either of you know if this exists in an English dub, because I feel the first time I saw it, I heard Woody Strode's voice.
I think that there is an English language version as well. Yeah,
there's an English dub on YouTube.
Oh, right, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
How's the quality on it?
It's absolutely terrible. You just random scan, badly dubbed. It's
but you know, you do kind of want to hear Woody Strode's voice, right? Because he's the lead, right? And I'm assuming it was probably mostly shot in English, right? Because it's even though it's an Italian production, you have people from all over, and Woody Strode is the lead. I don't think did he speak Italian? I don't think he.
I doubt much. You know, I mean, I doubt.
Maybe not enough to carry an entire film and give a good performance, right? And then they're shooting in. I don't know where in Africa they're shooting. That's the thing. I couldn't figure out which part of Africa they were shooting in.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either, but it did seem to be, you know, somewhere in Africa.
Somewhere they could blow the shit of a village out of. That's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess to get into the plot, because there's not a huge amount of it, which is kind of interesting. In many ways, most of the movie almost is a play, right? It taking place inside the like one or two cells inside the prison, other than the kind of beginning and end of the film, which take place outside the jail. But yeah, most of it is really just this kind of character study, really between two actors, Woody Strode and Franco City. But yeah, so did you know that this was sort of based on a true story? That was another thing.
It's a Patrice Lumumba, right? Story basically. The first democratically elected president of Congo, right?
Right. Yeah. I think he was the prime minister, because the president may have been the person who had him, or was instrumental in having him executed.
Yeah. It didn't end up. Famously one of those shadowy kind of CIA or something backed coup.
Oh man, everyone was involved. The British, like MI5 was involved, the CIA was involved, and you know, most deeply involved was the Belgian government, right? Because this is the Belgian Congo. This is the Belgian Congo, right? So yeah, and apparently the Belgian government apologized quite recently, and then sent the only remaining evidence of his body was apparently a gold tooth. And they sent it to his family and were like, yeah, sorry, we were involved in having him murdered, because he was kind of a pan-Africanist. He was anti-colonialist. He was kind of, the Americans were concerned he was going to be calling on the Soviets.
Yeah. It was like an African Che or something like that, right? Like, he was pretty scared of him. In this version, he's called Maurice Laloubi, right? As played by Woody Strode, but he's given more, I mean, he's more of a a black.
But he's literally Black Jesus. Yeah,
he's
this
not
is very
particularly political.
allegorical.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, yeah, basically it is that story. He's betrayed by Judas. Although interestingly, the Judas refuses to accept any money, which I thought was a kind of an interesting touch.
Yeah, it's clearly out of resentment or something. You know, we don't quite know why he's turning him in.
To try and to get him to sign something to basically say, "Oh, don't listen to me," and ends up in a cell with a thief, a lowdown thief, as played by Franco Citti, or Citti, and he kind of becomes his protector in a way, or as best as he can, and things, they end about as happily as you can imagine, right? With just an added, it's a grim as fuck film, I'll put it that way, with just the slightest glimmer of hope at the very, very end, in a way, which is quite nicely done, actually. I quite like that they, because it could have just been grim, right? So I quite like that they just laced that in there, that this story could continue one way in the future. Yeah. So obviously, when this film was released in the US, I think by Sig Shaw, who put out Superfly, I think it was advertised as like, a stick it to the man Shaft kind of Superfly movie.
Yeah.
I can't imagine innocent audiences expecting that. Must have been quite sorely disappointed. But I think this is actually a fucking good. This is probably the best of the three films we watched. But yeah, it's not
an exploitation film.
No.
There's a longer review of it, the film, in an issue of Sleazoid Express. It's slightly longer than the book version, and in it, sort of, Bill Landis sort of speculates that this film's thunder was sort of stolen by Sweet Badass Song.
Right.
Yeah, black audiences sort of embraced that film, and this one instead became more obscure.
I was just ready to listen to the important point you were going to make there, then, Gav, and then you held up a picture of Candace Rielson on chains and distracted me.
But I'll say, I think Franco Citti does a great job, because he's an actor that I'm always excited to see. Right, he got a start with Pasolini and is in almost all, I think, Pasolini's films. But then he became just like a jobbing actor too. He shows up in all kinds of Euro trash, crime films and stuff. Always playing what I think he really was, like he's kind of like the Joe D'Alessandro, to my mind, of Italy, right? Like somebody who is legitimately street and brings a certain edge to any performance that seems, more real than a kind of, glamour boy. But there was another actor I was really surprised. Actually, there's two other actors I was surprised to see in this. There's the guy, there's Stephen Forsyth, who is I think he's a soldier who's also been thrown into the jail for being insubordination, whatever. I think he's supposed to be, right? Like that's what I got from the movie.
Yeah, he's
not another criminal.
He's like an oft witness at the end, right? He's the
yeah. So yes, he comes a cropper of wrong place, because he's clearly not sympathetic at all to either Franco Citti's character, or he's quite an asshole when he's being asked to help out when they tortured the hell out of poor Woody Strode. But anyway, he is like the star of Hatchet for a Honeymoon or whatever, the Mario Bava film. He's quite a recognizable kind of square-jawed looking dude. And the other one that I was really excited to see is an actor called Luciano Catanacci, who plays and I've never seen him looking this like buff and scary. He's the guy who's beating the shit out of Franco at the beginning. He's shaved headed, and he's not wearing the mustache that I normally associate him with. But he's going to be in every one of the Umberto Lenzi crime films we watch. He is just ubiquitous in that. But he's in tons of shit. But anyway, he's really good. He's almost like bringing a Tom Hardy kind of intensity with the shaved head and the just, he's great in this. But anyway, those are just a few other things that excited me to see a few familiar faces from the Euro trash elevating themselves a little bit, doing something a bit more serious.
The other bit of interesting IMDb trivia as well, which I didn't know from the first time I watched the film. So originally, apparently, this film was going to be made by Corey Allen, who directed that film Avalanche, if you remember that, in 1978, and a whole bunch of TV and stuff. And yeah, apparently went to none other than Charles Manson to be a script consultant. Which
for Black Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
Helter Skelter.
Yeah. That famously
anti-colonial,
the black man everywhere, Charles Manson.
Yeah. Pro people of color. That's just weird. Anyway, as I said, a surprisingly serious, downbeat, quite in a way cinema verite looking, almost like it reminds me again of like some of that stuff they were doing, like Battle of Algiers, around this time as well in Italy. Right. This like
it does have a real
stuff.
Documentary look, and like I said, the scenes of on the one hand, I was like, oh yeah, this is a proper this is a proper anti-colonial story with teeth. And then on the other hand, I was wondering, where's that place they're blowing up for their film? I wasn't quite. I was having slight flashbacks to our discussion of Africo Addio, right?
Yes.
But nowhere near that level of exploitation, obviously. I pretty much knew you would like this film, Nick. I'm kind of curious if you enjoyed it, Gav, or if it's not your cup of tea.
Yeah, kind of interesting film. I think towards the end of Sleazoid Express, Bill Landis just sort of gravitating to sort of films where sort of art, politics, and sort of exploitation elements all sort of collided, and this is very much the sort of film he's getting into, I think, towards the end.
It's funny, speaking of Bill Landis, so when we were talking about him, I think we touched on briefly about how much he seems to have hated Joel M. Reed, right, the director of Bloodstained Freaks. And I actually got myself a Kindle version of the Blood-Sucking Freak book, right, by John Swasna, which you've probably read that, have you, Gav? I'm guessing.
Yeah, sort of gives Reed's perspective on that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know enough about it, and I haven't heard anyone else, but judging from, I mean, don't get me wrong, Joel M. Reed does say plenty of dodgy things now and again and just leaves them hang, and you're like it doesn't go any further. But it could also just be his very dark sense of humor. There's like, he's talking to because the author meets him in New York City at like, I guess it's in the early 2000s or something, and he's just doddering about the city, going here, going there, talking about all the haunts. And then at one point he just says like, oh yeah, there's a Catholic high school girls school over here. I like to go and stand in front of that sometimes and look at the girls. And then never mentions it again. And there's a few little bits like that. But other than that, I mean, he doesn't come across as as quite the monster Bill Landis seemed to think of him as. But like I said, so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if there's another source of that we need to read about Joel M. Reed.
Maybe the truth about Joel M. Reed sort of exists somewhere between like the Landis vitriol and the more positive stuff that's said about him in the biography. Yeah.
There's also, he has one hilariously kind of again line, which is they're talking about, because he loves fly fishing, one of his hobbies, right? Fly fishing. This time they're talking about, occasionally if you go fly fishing, you're like, well, this isn't working out. We're gonna have to use a worm on the hook or something like that, right? It's kind of like considered cheating for some, And they're out fly fishing somewhere with Joel M. Reed, and like, how's it going, Joel? I'm not catching anything. All right, okay, well, I'm gonna stick a worm on my hook. And Joel M. Reed's like, he gets furious, and he's like, I don't fish with worms, and I don't date old ladies. Like, those are the two things the lines he won't cross.
Mm.
Yeah. So
I was going to say, so the last thing before we wrap up with Black Jesus is the so there was a bit of a vogue around this time as well for these like CIA torture films, right? Like there's a couple of them. There's a couple of them made in Italy, right? There's one like Faccia di Spia, like Face of the Spy or things like that, which were kind of
the blood coming down the World Trade Center tower.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and there was kind of there was an interest in like, so they become these weird kind of mondo, like almost like those Japanese like oxen split torture things, but they're like, but there's a political thing, but you kind of get to have your cake and eat it too, because you get to see people have their nuts electrocuted, in an exploitation context, but it's it's edifying and elevating, and it should make you get out into the streets and hold a piece of paper on a stick, which is it's a weird thing that, again, Italy seems to be able to do. We will have our cake and eat it too. But I would say the scenes of torture in this are effective in that they don't always necessarily show a huge amount. In fact, there's a lot of like camera pans over the various white people kind of like watching what's happening to Woody Strode. But it's harsh. Like I was like, oh, Jesus. Particularly when they get the nails and hammer out. I was like, fuck me, this is
it doesn't pull any punches at all, this film. And I think it's definitely worth watching, and I'd love to see more of Zerlini's movies, actually, because the two I've seen so far have just been particularly notable, and
that could be our follow-up to the Lenzi show we're doing then.
All
like, we go high low each time.
Yeah, but that'll only take like half hour. I don't think he made
exactly.
That many, right? So,
yeah. All right, so we're on to your choice then, Clive. Tell us what you cooked up for us here. But Gav, had you seen this before?
Not before you sent the link. No.
Okay, yeah, this was brand new to me as well.
Same here. Yeah. Insalda Baudelaire, aka Andrea, aka Sex and Violence, a Spanish film from 1978, shot off Costa Brava in Catalonia.
It's quite beautiful looking, but I believe it is based on that song, right, by Waddy or whatever his name is. From what the fuck were they called? The punk band with the
Exploited.
Yes, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's probably based on that song, right? Like sex and violence, sex and violence, sex and violence, sex and violence, or not.
Don't encourage him, Gav. Just let him. Yeah, he'll burn out now.
Okay, I'm done.
No, clearly it's based on Dexys. Anyway, that's enough Exploited for now.
Right.
Yeah, this is one of the films in the Sleazoid Express book that jumped out at me, because it's one of the there's a whole bunch in there I still haven't seen, but this was the one like I'd never ever heard of, and Bill Landis seems to have really gone for it as well, right? And it's one of the films that has a poster I do like the poster as well. The poster reproduction.
Although, have you Googled the original Spanish poster?
Oh yeah.
Which is even more like, yeah, gets into where the film goes near the end. Anyway, yep.
Yeah, so it was just one of those ones like, oh, okay, this, I mean, if there's things just mentioned in passing, that's one thing, but he devotes so much time.
It's 2 pages.
Yeah, and also, not only that, it's, by this point, all the heavy hitters have had a Blu-ray release or Blu-ray pending, or people are mourning that there isn't a Blu-ray or something.
Yeah.
But as far as I can tell, Sex and Violence isn't really a film that lights up message boards to this day, right? I don't think there is like a huge march to get it out on disc, on Blu-ray. It isn't on Blu-ray. And so I was just kind of curious, like, oh, is this just, Bill Landis, nodded out in the middle of a film and then woke up at the end and thought, that was brilliant, and then filled in the gaps. Or if it's something, that is kind of worth, that's kind of been somewhat slightly ignored and fallen through the cracks. Yeah, I don't know. So, well, the story is simplicity itself. You've got some sort of perfume tycoon,
Yeah.
played by Xavier Elorriaga, who is apparently a Basque actor from the region. And he's basically filthy rich, and he hangs out on his yacht with his, well, smoking wife, it's got to be said, Marina Langner. And if you like the look of her, stick around, you're going to see a lot more of it. Even though the film opens with her basically
nude,
yes,
being perved on by her husband, who's taking pictures of her.
Taking Polaroids of her. Yeah, it's interesting because clearly he like worships her, like he's on a pedestal almost. But I don't know if she doesn't let him touch her, or if he's just, you know, that's not his thing. If he's more about watching, or I'm not quite sure. I suppose that's kind of answered at the end of the film, right? And I think we will spoil this one.
I think so. I think you kind of need to. So yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Wah, wah, wah. Yes, so they're hanging out on their yacht, being all rich and stuff, with some of their horrible rich.
Well, bit of foreshadowing though. And initially they're supposed to go out with another couple, and then he gets a phone call saying, "Oh, their dog has been poisoned, so they won't be able to make the couple's retreat." And he seems very unconcerned about this. He seems very blasé.
Yeah.
You know, his wife.
But supposedly, what I was reading is that in the English dub version, they changed that reference and said, someone's poisoned a pet monkey. I don't know why it's changed to a pet monkey.
Makes it more exotic.
That's interesting, although it doesn't really fit in with what happens later on, right? Also, there was an English dub of this then.
Yeah, apparently it's hilarious. But that seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth, the English dub version.
I'm assuming that's probably what Bill Landis saw as well, right? On 42nd Street. Probably.
Yeah, that would have been it, yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I would quite happily watch this film for several reasons, but I would watch it again with an English dub. So if anyone does dig that up, please let us know, because
supposedly also a sort of there's a voiceover right at the end of the film saying that this is after that happened, his wife got revenge on him in several different ways or something. So maybe they tried to like give it a more happy ending. You know?
Oh well, that sounds a little bit of a hat on a hat, right? Because
because this film
anyway, right?
It already has a choose your own adventure ending, which I don't think I've ever seen before.
No, apart from Clue, right?
Yes, other than Clue.
What they really should have done, they should have stopped it and like roll your dice now, and then you can choose. Right. I would have had one of those. I used to have those. You know, the ones in the little plastic case. The
the Pop-O-Matic. You know,
I need one of them again. I miss the Pop-O-Matic dice. So yes, so
yeah, a bunch of rich assholes come aboard that they meet, and they party and they talk rich asshole talk, and it's all very giallo. It's interesting to me. This has to have been a bit influenced by particularly that strain of Sergio Martino. George Hilton is an asshole with giant sunglasses, you know, and all the rich people are awful, and then somebody starts offing them. It reminded me a lot of that strain of Italian thriller, except that it really goes for it later on when we get to the last boat on the left part of the story, or in fact, more realistically, I think boat at the edge of the park, because that's the film that this reminds me most of once it really gets going.
Yes, so eventually it's getting dark, all the rich fuckers are fucked off, and then there's a couple who have been
the pedal boat.
Yeah, there's a couple in a pedal boat, right? They don't have a yacht, they got a pedal boat, and they're kind of invited aboard, right? And this is Loren. How do you pronounce a C with a tail?
I don't know.
Lorenz.
But apparently he also goes by Lorenzo Santa Maria.
We'll do that then. Lorenzo Santa Maria, who a young lady, it seems, who people have also been perving on the main wife character. I mean, there's a few, oh, she's looking awfully good. And then also when they spot this couple on the pedal boat, there's, oh, she's fine looking. There's a few, you know. So they come aboard and immediately just fucking like are irritating in like a
oh my god,
like a
so
kind of way, right?
Santi, who is the Lorenzo character, he's like all of those characters, like David Hess and and Franco City sometimes, and there's like Luigi Montefiore and Rabbit Dogs, all of them, but like super high on speed, and like a speed addled spider monkey just running all over the boat in his tiny speedos, acting like a complete asshat. The scene where he bites the book and throws it overboard, like,
he can fuck off my yacht, right? They don't
like right away. I would have had them. Goodbye.
But it's interesting. I actually, if I ever decided to remake this film, I actually know someone who would be perfect casting. I actually know a guy who acts a lot like this and looks quite a lot like Lorenzo Santamaria as well.
Okay.
He's less homicidal, but he is this animated, just jumping around the place. Like that's what he's like 24 hours a day. I'll have to introduce him to you sometime. Yes, so they get on board and like they fuck everything up. Like she draws a cock on the side of the with nail varnish. Which I thought
and it's interesting. She doesn't talk at all, so she seems to be mute for the first chunk until later when suddenly she starts talking a whole lot, and it seems like she's maybe the brains of the outfit. But she's conspicuously silent for a big chunk of their initial acting like lunatics on the boat.
And then well, here we go. As spoilers go, here's the first one. Turns out it's a man. As played by Riccardo Massip. He's a very kind of slender, feminine fellow who, to be fair, does do a good job of looking like a woman.
I mean, drag is hard to pull off in a bikini, and I think they pull it off pretty well.
Usually the old block and tackle gets in the way there, but
well, there is a little bit of a cheat because Juan, who's the character, has tied a little thing in the front that kind of dangles in front of where his package is. But he does give us the full crying game. He does kind of drop pants for a moment, so we're in no doubt as to his biology.
So these two people,
reprobates.
So and then Xavier Elorriaga's character just kind of almost bows out of the film for a while here, right? Because he's pretty much just tied
tie him to a chair, and make him watch,
which makes sense. It comes around and makes sense towards the end. But while I was watching it, I was thinking, okay, they're not very interested in him, and they pretty much devote their entire time to sexually humiliating Marina Langner's character for the majority of the running time. And hallelujah to that. This is a massively entertaining film if it's what you're in the mood for. I would say that. If you're looking for much, that's the thing with this film is like we mentioned House on the Edge of the Park and some of these other things. They often have that the class politics angle, right? There's some
I mean, right back to Last House on the left, right? I mean, right back to what the hell's the Virgin Spring, right?
Yes.
It's kind of it's always threaded through this thing of the haves and the have-nots, the revenge of the have-nots against the haves, right?
And then when you have these fuckers on a huge yacht and then some people on a pedal boat, it's set up. You think, oh, here we go, it's gonna be that, but actually, no. I would say this film has very little in the way of a political statement to make. It's more a statement about how much fun it is to torture a hot young woman. I think it's about the extent of the political messaging here. You disagree?
My feeling is there's a strain of this kind of, like, I would say, highly misanthropic and maybe misogynistic, but I would say broader, like misanthropic, like Mario Bava's Rabid Dogs. Right? You've seen it?
Yeah.
Do you remember? Do you remember? So most of the movie seems to be Luigi Montefiore like sweating and leering and making girls pee, like Pisha, Pisha. Until you get to the end, when you realize, oh, wait a second, the nice guy turns out to also be a complete piece of shit, right? Like that's one of these movies that has that twist ending where you're like, oh, wow, nobody was likable in this film. They were all scumbags. And and I would say House by the Edge of the Park as well, right? That has very much the same ending as this, although 2 years later, right? The little twist at the end where you're like, oh, actually, were the rich folks getting off on all of this? Was this just that they're so jaded that they're like, they need John Morgan and David A. Hess to show up to like put a little, and then there's the whole, and then there's a bit of a revenge thing thrown in too. But it felt like the end of that movie was kind of like, they were like, oh yeah, that was a fun bit of, all the class.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. There are those films, and like you said, they're half and half, right? It's an excuse for just some cheap thrills, but also there's this kind of misanthropic in general thing to cover up the misogyny because However, this is one of the few times I think I've just watched it, which is just nope. That's not what this film is about. They've added this little bit at the end, just to kind of make it seem as if. But no, this film is all about watching Marina Langner naked and humiliated.
Sure. But I
do what the film is primarily about, and on that, as that kind of film goes,
it's very successful.
It's fucking great. I mean, it reminded me of something like there's a Japanese pink film from like 1986 or something called Female Market, which is just that little bit nastier than it needs to be, right? Just for the fuck of it. And because there's that whole thing with the lobster finger puppets, which is just weird and gross.
That part, and then the part that almost immediately follows it, which is maybe we'll talk about it. But as soon as the lobster like shell finger puppets come out, I was like, and then the whole part where he's like where like the semi almost like borderline low IQ handicapped like spider monkey madman who's been running all over, just the kind of
they have a little like lobster puppet fight over
on her belly,
on her tits, basically, and then she's whipped because that's her,
and then
obviously, and then they put a
I've seen
a lot on her face.
Yes.
There was cigar out on her face and force her husband to piss on it so that she doesn't. And it's just
you've actually missed the only part that actually made me nearly heave. And I've got a reasonably strong stomach when it comes to this kind of stuff because I've seen plenty of this kind of stuff over the years. But the part where Juan spits food into her mouth and makes her chew it up, I actually was starting to get queasy, which doesn't happen often. But I was like, oh, I don't know.
I was rock hard too. It's just I mean, the thing is, you got to we'll get to conclusions. So so after all this is done, there is kind of like a triple surprise ending. Spoilers again. So
in fairness, ending one isn't a surprise. I had figured this twist out from minute 5 of the movie. Like all the scenes of him standing in his little short shorts with his like telephoto lens staring at her from above. I was like, this dude's a creep. Like he hates her. Like whatever. Yeah, he's all about controlling her and her image, and he's a scumbag. And so there was no part of me that was surprised. I was like, yeah, this is exactly, of course. But then the second 2 endings, I was more like, huh?
Yeah. So
say what now?
Yeah. So it turns out, it was all orchestrated. He paid them. Basically, it all played out. It was his plan. He wanted to see
it's either a sexual fantasy or he's putting her in her place, because she's from old money. She's an aristocrat, and he's kind of nouveau riche. He's made his money in the perfume business, and her family kind of looks down their nose. She looks down her nose at him, and this is his chance to like put her in her place, right?
Yeah. And then the film suddenly goes, stop! It could have gone this way, and then you get alternative ending. What was alternative ending?
Alternative ending 2. Alternative ending 2 is the one that's the most wrong-headed one. The one where you're just like, holy shit. That's the one where she wakes. So she's not. So in the first ending, she's knocked out. She doesn't even hear him pay off the two thugs, and they just leave. In ending 2, she wakes up. She hears this. She gets up and she goes, "Fuck you! I'm going with them." And leaves with the guys who've been sexually torturing her for the last hour. That's the ending where you're just like, yeah, that's not an okay ending in any way, shape, or form. Wow.
And ending 3 is her getting her revenge with a harpoon gun. We should also mention the dog does die.
Yes, she has. Yeah, we should even mention she had her own dog. She has a massive Doberman. That was on the boat for a little while. So that's the film. It's pretty full on exploitation. I can see why Bill Landis wrote about it, because obviously if you were going to around this time, there would have been plenty of porn theaters showing things even worse, but you kind of expect that, and you're going into a hardcore theater, you're watching hardcore. There's something about seeing this level of degradation softcore and presented as like a proper film with production values and stuff, right? It's still it's beautifully shot.
It's beautifully shot, and it's not some dope addict they picked up off the streets. I mean, they've got a properly hot looking woman who was in Banana Joe as well, by the way, with Bud Spencer.
Another great Oliver Onion soundtrack there.
And done with this level of so it's a proper film, but it is devoted to sexual humiliation of her. And I would say on that level, it's a bit of a minor classic. I've very pleased to have discovered this little grimy little gem of a film, and then you've just got some added bonus bollocks at the end to make it a bit more fun. Well, what did you make of this one, Gav? Did you get on with it? How many boxes of tissues did you go through?
Yes, interesting film, isn't it? I mean, I've never. It's one of those films I've vaguely heard about, but I've never had the chance to see. And unfortunately, I think everything, what little has been written about this film, always gives away the two twists. About one of the cast members being male and twist ending. But I'm surprised it's not more well known. I can only think, the lack of a easily available English language version. So that's sort of
It is a surprise, isn't it, that it's not a bigger kind of cult name.
Yeah.
Because it brings the sleep.
Yeah. It's like played 42nd Street in November 1983, and then at the Selwyn, and then the film that followed it was Sleepaway Camp. So
I see the theme they went for. Right.
A connection there, if you know that film.
The unexpected Mr. Happy double bill, I suppose. But no, I mean, I was really quite taken. I mean, I was just trying to approach the film from what it is, I suppose. And for what it is, I mean, you should definitely check it out if you're
if that's what floats your boat.
If you're a wrong 'un, like I clearly am. But and buyer beware otherwise, right? How about you, Nick? I mean, you're famously cagey and don't allow your true personality to shine on these things. But let's see how you get out of this one. I'm sure you enjoy it to an extent.
You bastard, Clive.
You like lobster.
So yeah. What can I say? I mean, the thing is, as I said, it fits very comfortably in, to my mind, in amongst the other films that we've mentioned, right? Like The Last House on the Left, and stuff. So it's not like this is brand new territory to me.
No. But do you see what I mean? It's surprisingly monomaniacal in, like, there's almost nothing else other than just them humiliating it. There's no like a bit of gore really, or there's no like
Nope.
there's no
right.
raging against you rich shits, you got all this.
Yep.
Nothing.
Yeah, no, you're right. And we don't cut away to Martin Covey or whatever his name is, doing comedy hijinks in the original Last House on the Left.
It is just the misogynist male gaze.
It gets very claustrophobic, actually, right? Once we're into the boat, and once they're on the boat, and we're kind of just locked into that space and time.
If I mean, a Sean Costello hardcore film or something like that, you would understand it, right? Like because that's how that kind of thing works, right? But for a mainstream film, it is surprisingly
it seems like a very hard-edged giallo to me, like just like as hard-edged as they could really be. It has a lot of the trappings, to my mind, of the giallo, but
without any of the mystery or
pushed to the extreme.
They've stripped everything away. If you don't like seeing women humiliated, there's little else. Is that true to say?
This is true. Yeah. I would imagine if you went to the cinema expecting or hoping for something other than that, you would be disappointed.
So luckily, we all enjoy that stuff here. But
the other thing that fascinates me is the speed with which, like, Spain goes from, like, I mean, like Franco was like in power not that long before, and like they're having to be really careful and cagey about what they do, and then it's like as soon as that fucking guy dies, it's like holy shit, all bets are off, and like 50 years of repression are just like bleh. And then you end up with stuff like this.
There you go, Jen Franco to Jess Franco in like that lickety split.
That's nice. You should write that book, Clive. Jen Franco to Jess Franco.
But sorry, I interrupted you. You were just about.
I'm equally surprised that it's not better known, that it doesn't have a higher profile amongst trash aficionados.
Yeah.
I said to you about this 25 years ago when I was watching all of those kinds of films, right? When I went, we all go through that chunk of our life when we just back to back watch all the night train murders and everything that's kind of like adjacent to Last House on the Left, every variation that was made in whatever country, how come this just wasn't on anybody's radar back then?
Or even not even trash, like when we were talking Sleazoid Express, there was those people who got obsessed with the Olga films and stuff and just wanted to track Stanley Bowden down and just talk about them and had stills and stuff like that. I'm wondering if it's just because it came along a little bit. I mean, 1978, I suppose there was enough genuine, proper filth to occupy people's minds. So this kind of, but it's a real fetishist's film, right?
It's also like I was reading that it's one of these infamous like one and done directors as well.
Leopoldo Pomes, right?
This is his only film.
Yeah,
which is quite
photographer, I think. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So if he's a photographer now, we may know where this film comes from. He is our protagonist.
It's not a film that portrays photography in a particular fashion.
Nope.
But no, this was I'm very glad to have discovered this. I'm keeping my copy of this and so we're giving it a watch every now and again.
So yes, thanks to Bill Landis and Sleazoid for as I said, I hadn't seen any of these three before, so it's always fun for me to branch outside of my safe zones and try something I haven't already seen 5 times.
Are we all agreed that Black Jesus is probably the best of the 3 films, like objectively, or are we getting some pushback on that?
I think the classic at the moment, yeah. I'd say it's the classiest of the bunch.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what you mean by best film, right? It depends why you've shelled out your, $5 to go to.
Oh yeah,
You know,
true.
42nd Street.
If you were going to Black Jesus cock in hand, you'd come out very badly disappointed, right?
Yeah, so I mean, there's always that element with. But yes, I suppose if you're talking about worthiness, seriousness, all that stuff, then yeah, Black Jesus is.
Well, I'm just like a properly well. I know Sex and Violence is well made as well, but and Preacher Man is as well as it could have been done under the circumstances, right? None of them were, but it's interesting, without really, because what we did, we just randomly chose 3 without really consulting with each other too much. It is interesting to see that, especially if you're not marinated in exploitation film, if you're an outsider and you picked up a book called Sleazoid Express and you heard that these 3 jokers had chosen 3 films from it to talk about on a YouTube video, you'd probably assume that those films would be very similar in tone, right? But across the 3 of these, that's quite a...
Oh yeah, they're totally different.
We've covered the waterfront.
Cornpone comedy with occasional boob flash to heavy, serious political allegory, to absolute balls to the wall exploitation.
Yeah. If I was programming my own little theatre, I suppose, where all things are allowed, you'd put Black Jesus on first, and then be a good film, and then to release a bit of tension, put Sex and Violence on so everyone can knock one out, and then have a bit of a laugh at the end to Preacher Man and go home happy. Yeah, that's at our theatre, the Crimson, of course.
There was this thing that they used to do to raise money for the Cinema Muerte Film Festival. I can't remember what it was called, but basically the concept was you paid less the longer you stayed. And so it was basically like the whole point was like, so it was programmed by my friend and noise musician Sam McKinley. And basically the films got increasingly difficult as they went on. So, you got to Nico Mastorakis' Island of Death about midway through. And you got to things like Things, the Canadian, thing, like nearer to the end when you were pretty sure there are not many people are going to be able to stick that out after having watched, 4 or 5 films beforehand. But I always thought it was a great idea, this kind of like trial by fire, on the big screen, like going to a cinema and just subjecting yourself to increasingly in different ways, difficult to just glacially paced and boring, or difficult because the subject matter is, over the top. But yeah, it's a cool concept.
I would imagine Sam McKinley would quite enjoy Sex and Violence.
I have no doubt. That's I would have been the kind of thing that I'm surprised he didn't give me a copy back in 1990, whatever.
Also, not the film getting an Alex Cox intro on BBC Two anytime soon. I don't think.
But I do know what to do now if I've ever eaten a lot of shrimp and I have a lot of
finger puppets left.
Who I never occurred to me to. But
you lack imagination, Nick. That's
apparently.
Right. I think we're done.
Yep.
Cheers for joining us once again, Gav. Always a pleasure.
Gav.
Actually, I had a bit of a thought. I don't know. I can edit this out if you disagree, but I enjoyed our little talk about Sleazoid Express, and I was wondering if you're both interested to get Gav on again, LAF, to talk about the Bleeding Skull book, the 80s one.
I've never read it, so
I know what it is.
Okay, it's basically, and you can get a reasonably priced Kindle as well, because the original books are getting a bit pricey now. There's a new one, there's a 90s one which I'm reading at the moment, but the original Bleeding Skull was an 80s one. I think it's from Head Press actually, and it's shot on video horror films of the 80s.
Oh. Okay, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in reading that for sure. So
I haven't read the 80s one yet, but the 90s one is is pretty fucking entertaining, and I think it would make for not only an interesting chat amongst the three of us about it, but also I think a follow-up.
Yes, like this. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
If you lads are up for that, maybe we shall be returning to your screens soon.
Is the Abomination covered, I would imagine, in the 80s one then?
It might be, yeah, it would fit. Well, I don't know. I mean, was that shot on video or was it shot on 16?
Well, both. I think it feels like it's one of those things that maybe like has scenes that are, yeah. Anyway, like Things actually, which is Super 8, and then occasionally
Things
VHS.
must be in there. I would have thought.
I hope so.
If Things isn't in there, then it's worthless. So throw it away.
That's Things 1989, of course, not to be confused with any of the other things that exist out there.
Anyway, that might be
Yeah.
coming at you in 3D sometime soon. Until then, cheery bye.
Doodly pip.